Hello and welcome to today's webcast hosted by the Sales Management Association. Our session will start in just a few moments. First, I have a few introductory announcements. Announcement number one, please note that we will not open our broadcast to attendees, but we do welcome your questions and comments. We'll provide instructions for submitting those, but in fact, we made it a little easier than you might have remembered in the past. We now have a commenting option directly on the stream that you're viewing the session in. So just click on the comment box and it will allow you to insert a comment or question. And we'll do our best to get to all of those during today's session. Also, please note that our session will be recorded. We will make it available for playback in the Sales Management Association's resource library. Our members will also be able to download slides there. We are happy you're with us. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, we welcome you to our presentation today. The Sales Management Association, if you're not familiar with us, is a professional association. We serve a couple of different roles and jobs, including sales operations, sales enablement, and sales leadership professions. We provide our members with research, case studies, training, peer networking, and professional development. Again, if you're joining us for the first time, please take a moment and look around our website while you're here with us today. Also, please save the date. Our 2023 annual conference is scheduled for December 7 and 8 at the Gozueta Business School at Emory University in Atlanta. You may actually use the QR code on the screen now to take you to the conference web page, or you may go there directly. It's at salesmanagementconference.com. We hope to see you there at Emory University in Atlanta. I'm Bob Kelly, Sales Management Association Chairman. Today, it's my pleasure to moderate a session on sales coaching. And I wanted to take just a few moments and explain why this session and this topic is important to our audience. In fact, it's perhaps one of the most important things that we see our members concerned with these days. So let me start by suggesting that there is both some good news and bad news when it comes to sales coaching programs. So first, the good news. The good news is that sales coaching is a very high yield investment for sales organizations. Based on our research, which surveyed more than 100 large sales organizations in our membership, we found that the organizations doing a good job with sales coaching are 22% more likely to meet firm sales objective. In comparing growth rates, they are growing at a 17% higher rate. And in terms of overall productivity, they are 9% more productive overall. There are, in fact, very few places to get these kinds of returns in investing in the sales organization. But though it is a high yield investment, it is also a fairly high risk one. Our research shows that fewer than half of firms are effective in sales coaching. And so today's session is really intended to help you minimize that risk and maximize the yield on these investments. There are a number of things that can cause sales coaching programs to go wrong. We'll examine those in today's session, which is really all about implementing effective sales coaching programs. Now, our session today is actually one in a series of 5 sessions on sales coaching program effectiveness. If you haven't seen the first one, this one is the second. It's not important that you see that now. You may find it a really worthwhile investment of your own time, though, to go back and watch it. The first session was on foundations of sales coaching program success, and then we will explore 3 additional topics after today's session. We'll look forward to sharing those with you. But before we go into today's session, I would like to introduce my esteemed co-presenter. He is Bob Sanders from Axiom Sales Kinetics. Bob Sanders is a partner at Axiom Sales Kinetics, a provider of Salesforce effectiveness solutions and services. Bob recently returned to Axiom after serving as Chief Operating Officer at Reflect Systems, a digital signage software provider. He joined in 2018 as Executive VP of Sales. Under Bob's leadership, Reflect Systems recurring revenue doubled and the firm was acquired. Bob is a frequent and very highly rated presenter to the Sales Management Association's audience. In fact, I can't really think of another person we've had on the topic of sales coaching who has more standing, more credibility, and more expertise than Bob Sanders. So I'm very happy to welcome back to the virtual Sales Management Association stage, Bob Sanders.
It's almost like we're together in the same spot. It feels like it.
There's just a very thin black line on the screen separating us.
A little thin black line. That's all there is between you and me.
Can you? Anyway,
Almost touch you.
Yeah.
Hello, Mr. Kelly.
Yeah, great to have you, Bob. Thanks for being with us.
My pleasure.
Why don't we start off? Well, I'm sorry. I meant to display this slide while I introduced you.
Yes.
There you are, and what appears to be
a version of me.
Yes, this was back when you were wearing the Nehru jackets, and
my Nehru face. That's what
your Nehru face. We all had that. Now, Bob's written a book. It's called The Sales Transformation Journey. He's very graciously agreed to provide a copy of it to us today. You can use this QR code to actually download a free version of the book. Highly recommended. We'll try to display this QR code again before the end of the session today. Bob, let's spend a little time talking about what we'll cover today. Yeah. Three things, really. They are why sales coaching programs fail. Secondly, we'll talk about what effective programs look like, their characteristics and attributes. And then we'll also try acknowledging that not everyone's going to be implementing one from scratch. You may have one in place now. We'll talk about how to optimize the program that you have, how to actually apply some of the things we've talked about to your own circumstance. Sound like a plan?
Awesome. I think it's a great plan.
Excellent. Why do sales coaching programs fail, Bob Sanders?
That is a very good question. And I thought you did a really good job of making the case. And it's amazing how many times when we do these sessions and talk with corporate clients, how many people are either about to embark on a program, a journey to implement sales coaching, or have tried to implement it. And what's interesting is, as you said earlier, they don't always work. And there are 6 things that really stand out as being consistent obstacles to effectiveness. And the first couple I'll cover, and then I think we've got a couple of slides to support that with data. But the first one is really general ambiguity, and it's in 2 parts. One part is the obvious one. People aren't clear about what coaching is, but the other is not having a model that you're coaching people to. When you have a sports team, you're running a football team and you're coaching players of the team, they have a playbook. They understand what's expected of them and their role in each position. And when sales organizations don't have that, coaching becomes very difficult to define and measure effectively. So I think that's the first one. I think the second one, and I think you've got some great data to support this, is a lot of conflicting priorities. We implement a program and tell managers, we want you to shift some of your focus and start coaching. But those managers often then are still asked to do the exact same things they were asked to do before. And those things are the habits that they already have. They're the things that they've already become familiar with, and they're the things the organization expects them to deliver. And so we don't create any space. We don't reprioritize to make coaching a real focal point for them.
Bob, talk a little bit about skill, the third thing, and then let's pause. And I've got some supporting information that might help us just quickly understand these first three things.
Yeah, and the skill part's really interesting because when we put people into sales coaching positions, sales management positions, we are generally taking, not always, but generally we're taking top performing salespeople. They got to be top performing salespeople because they were good at prospecting, they were good at qualifying, they were good at presenting, they were good at handling objections and negotiations. But coaches have to be good at one-on-one reviews, opportunity reviews, joint sales calls, about identifying gaps and understanding the root cause of those gaps, and then prescribing corrective activities. Those are a completely different set of skills. And we often don't upskill the managers when we put them into coaching positions. And so they're not really equipped to do it. Then we don't make it a priority. And then there's ambiguity about it. And the programs end up kind of just falling apart.
So let's talk in a little more detail about these first three things. That is the notion of ambiguity and then conflicting priorities and just the lack of skill in coaching. So let's take them one at a time. First, ambiguity. The thing that we found in research is that coaching is widely considered a fantastic idea. Everyone thinks about it differently. And in fact, in many firms, it's managers who decide, individual managers decide what actual activities and behaviors constitute coaching. In just a quarter of firms, 26%, is there a published sort of agreed to definition of what's included. Clearly the data in our research show that this ambiguity is quite pervasive. And just as an example, in only half of the firms is developing skills considered coaching. I mean, many people say they do coaching, but then if you ask, well, do you do this? Do you do that? One of those things being, do you develop skills? And salespeople, only about half say they do, that also say they do coaching. So there is a very wide-ranging set of beliefs about what coaching might represent in sales organizations. Secondly, conflicting priorities. Here's some more data. We asked companies, why are your managers not coaching? And 2/3 say, well, they're too busy. And also 63% say they're not held accountable. And then another 42% also say senior leaders don't really prioritize this. So really all of this data on this slide suggests that it's not a clear priority when these things are happening. And if that's not present, then sales managers will reprioritize as they see fit. And then lastly, let's talk about this notion of know-how. We'll stay with the same chart, add one little additional bar there, which is a third from the top, which indicates 55% of firms say their sales managers don't know how to coach. And just 24% include coaching proficiency and how they judge sales manager performance. So just a little bit of color to round out those things.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's really interesting for me, Bob, about that data is even with the best intentioned programs, when we end up implementing something that we're calling a sales coaching initiative, because we don't change the way we hire and promote, we don't define really clearly what the difference is between coaching and other activities, we don't prioritize it. We'll get into a couple other obstacles here. What ends up happening is we implement something called a coaching program, but by the time it's done, everybody kind of just resorts to doing the things they said before, only they're calling it coaching. So we're kind of changing what it is rather than actually changing the way people behave, right? And it just gets watered down over time. And that ends up becoming the undoing of the programs in a lot of cases. It's not that they stopped coaching, it's that they never actually made the transformation in the first place.
Yeah, indeed.
And those aren't the only, though those are three big obstacles, and they're consistent There are challenges that we see really consistently, but I think that there are other things that contribute to that to a certain degree. And one that really stands out for me that's just huge is ineffective measurement. And it's huge because when we implement a coaching program, so presumably if you're on this call and you're thinking about implementing coaching inside your organization, you are expecting to affect a change in how managers interact with sellers. And by definition, that means that managers will begin to instruct and develop the skill of the sellers in addition to the other things that they do with them, right? The thing is, we want to affect a change in behavior, but we oftentimes see organizations don't make any change in what they measure. So we want managers to change how they develop and how they engage with the salespeople, but we still manage them based on the same things. We still want the forecast done in the same way at the same time. We still only look at the numbers. We don't actually ask them to demonstrate how they've impacted the skill of the people. We don't actually score them, which, by the way, is very common in other fields. In professional sports in particular, players get graded not on the outcomes, just on the outcomes, but they get graded on their execution against the model. So when we don't measure the right things and we don't measure things that demonstrate the change of behavior, but we tell people we want them to change, eventually they just wait it out and it goes away. And change is hard, by the way. So we'll talk more about that in a minute. And then we don't give them tools that make it easy. So if you are being directed now to develop your team, but you don't have anything to rely on that you can use as a tool to help you in that effort, and you have to become an actual trainer, it's way more than any sales manager is likely able to do. And so, like if you're a PGA teaching professional, they have resource libraries for things. You have to have the interaction with your students to figure out what can be done to help them improve their golf swing. But there's a library you can go to figure out what's a good drill for this particular challenge or what's a good drill for that. We don't provide managers with those kinds of tools. And so it's really difficult. And then finally, people just get tired. You know, they talk about coaching and they want coaching, but they don't change the measurement. They don't have the tools. And so people just get impatient that it's not taking hold. And eventually it just sort of, I very rarely see people say, yes, we abandoned or canceled a coaching program. It's usually benign neglect. It just, oh yeah, we did a coaching program. Nobody's coaching. We tried.
And we allow it to go to seed,
Yeah.
just as we allow many coaches for professional sports teams to go to seed.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Hey, Bob,
absolutely.
I'm going to backtrack for a minute. Your comment about tools.
Uh-huh.
So this might not really be clear to everyone what you're talking about. What kind of tools do you need for sales? Well,
Yeah.
I'm just going to sort of parrot back to you the things I've heard you say over the past 10 years about, good coaching and the kind of tools that matter. And they're really about practice.
Yeah.
In other words, when you find something wrong or a deficit to address in a coachee, what's great is if you can assign them some things to allow them to practice, to build the muscle, build the skills that they need to be better at whatever that is. So often the thing that managers really need are really good practice sets or assignments or things that they can do with salespeople,
Right.
to help them develop.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And the first challenge in that, in many cases, is there isn't a common methodology. There's no common models that the company has adopted for how they do anything. So they can't go build learning activities and practice exercises around the models because they don't have any. So now when a manager identifies, and I'll pick one in particular, it's fairly common, a manager identifies that a particular salesperson isn't good at helping develop clear differentiating buying criteria. And the person needs to practice that skill. Well, where are they going to go to learn what the skill is? What do we even call the skill? And what activities can they engage in? And if the manager is supposed to actually teach it to them, now you're talking about the difference between a 15-minute conversation to diagnose and prescribe the right activity and an hour and a half to teach it to somebody. And there just isn't time to do that across all the skills. And few managers are equipped to do all that because doesn't align with the way people learn anyway. Just pure lecture isn't going to do it. So the best companies actually provide managers with resources that they can leverage to assign the activities, but they also give them tools that help them diagnose what the root cause is for a particular performance and behavior gap and what the right activity is, so the managers don't have to figure it all out and memorize it all. And that's one of the things that's really essential if managers are going to get good at impacting the underlying skill and knowledge that ultimately is essential to produce the behaviors and the results in the team.
Well, good stuff. Well, now we want to talk about the second thing on our agenda, which is what are the attributes of effective programs. Now, the easy way to tackle this topic would be simply to go back to this slide and
say, don't do this.
Effective programs, they're not ambiguous.
Yeah.
They don't have conflicting priorities. Coaching is a clear priority, and managers know how to coach. They are measured effectively on outcomes associated with coaching. They have good tools and they have patient leadership. And these things are true. You can take the photographic negative of this slide and you can turn that into, things that you need to do to be effective in coaching. But there's some bigger ideas here that we wanted to explore. I'll let you take this slide, Bob. But what are the things that companies should really consider if they are striving to have very effective coaching?
Yeah, and I think the first one is one, Bob, that you've talked about a lot in our conversations about coaching, and that is it has to be tied to the company's culture. One of the reasons that we see the pitfalls or obstacles that we have on the previous slide is because it's not really embedded in the company's culture. It's a program, it's a training program in many cases at that, and not something that is really aligned with the fundamental approach the company takes to doing business. So, for example, if the company doesn't, as a matter of course, do coaching for other roles, then coaching in sales is going to be that much harder to implement. If the company doesn't demonstrate by its values and its policies and its practices that it wants to elevate the skill and knowledge of the entire workforce, trying to do that with the salespeople is going to be that much more challenging. So you can tie it to the culture. First, you have to have a culture that values learning and development and growth, right? If you don't have that and you're trying to implement a coaching problem, I think it's going to be a huge challenge. And my recommendation, by the way, wouldn't be don't do the coaching problem. My recommendation would be whoever is leading that charge, sit down with the senior leaders of the business and ask them, how does this align with the rest of the company's priorities? And how does this fit with the culture that you're trying to build here? Because it looks like it's an outlier. And outliers are things that get abandoned pretty quickly. So I would make sure it's tied to the culture. And by the way, there's some practical things to do there. One is go look at the job descriptions. And you pointed this out in the research, Bob. When we're not actually expecting someone to coach, we write a job description for a sales manager that doesn't include coaching. We don't interview and hire for the skills and the capacity to be a coach, like empathy. Then we're probably not going to get very good at it. So look at the job descriptions. And if it's not reflected, they probably need to be rewritten, update the hiring standards and the promotion standards for those people, and then rethink the evaluation system. How are we going to incorporate coaching effectiveness into how we evaluate sales managers? And by the way, if you're the one responsible for the program and you get heavy resistance at that point, it's probably a good sign that you might want to find another initiative to go work through, because it's going to be hard to make that happen. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a couple of comments here. One is that is a challenging environment when the culture does not value development or coaching, and yet a manager is committed to providing it for their team. So one thing to point out is that scholars that study culture do say that a culture can be defined by any kind of social unit in a organization that has a shared experience. So to some extent, you still do have the opportunity to influence culture, so-called.
Absolutely.
But you'll be on a small canvas, not a large one. And also, I'd just like to point out, you mentioned this in passing, it's really true that I'm very interested in culture, and I think it is especially important now. Right now, one of the defining challenges of sales organizations is that the supply of available labor is smaller than it used to be, especially in the United States. Mm-hmm. And as a result, companies have to do things differently. One of them that we're finding out is that they have to compete on things like culture and values. And so culture is actually a greater economic significance to sales organizations, I believe.
Yeah,
It's more
totally.
important. And also, retaining key employees, especially salespeople, has a lot to do with developing them. So this is another sort of interlocking
Yeah.
circumstance happening that I think says we need to elevate the importance of coaching. I'd also point out that the people who really understand how to change culture, they indicate the difference between values that represent core elements of culture and artifacts of culture. So many of the things that we suggest you might actually acknowledge as merely artifacts of culture. For example, a good job description that includes coaching. That doesn't really mean you have a
Right.
culture of coaching, but that's an important artifact. How do you actually change the core values? Well, the best writing about this topic, by the way, is Edgar Schein's work. He's an MIT management guy. He's deceased now. Edgar Schein. He points out that if you really want to change culture, you have to lead people through change. You either have to like respond to a crisis, or you have to have this shared experience of doing something new to solve a problem. And so this is how I think we integrate coaching into culture. We say we've got to learn faster in our organization, and we have to develop people better. And that's how we do. And so by elevating coaching to do those things, I think that impacts culture. And one
Yeah.
other thing I would point out here, which is I don't know if this is an artifact or if this is a core value, but if your coaches aren't being coached, it's a disconnect in the culture.
Yeah. Yeah.
What you don't want is a policy of coaching for thee, but not for me. You want people in senior leadership roles modeling this behavior.
Yeah, totally agree with that. In fact, I want to clarify what I said at the beginning too. If you are on the call and you see there is a disconnect, that doesn't mean you don't have an opportunity to implement coaching effectively. But to your point, Bob, you may do it differently as a result. Our greatest coaching success was in the exact same organization as our biggest coaching failure. And the difference was finding local people, local managers or local teams where it was culturally important to them and where they were able to make a commitment and where they could, in fact, invest their time on their own. And in the same organization with roughly 20 locations around the country, we had 2 that had coaching cultures that extended beyond the existing leadership team through, 3 generations of leaders, and 18 others that never did it and never adopted coaching, never. And by the way, the 2 markets that did, consistently the top performing markets through multiple leaders. So you don't have to abandon the program, but it's an interesting way to affect the change from the ground up by demonstrating the results that you can get when you are implementing coaching, not just for the sales team, but you're making development of the people a priority. And as you point out, Bob, you're going to attract better talent and you're going to retain the talent. They have the lowest turnover in those markets also, by the way. So
indeed,
really reinforces that. I think that's a good segue into the second thing that's important when people think about how to implement this. A lot of times these initiatives are led from sales enablement teams or training and development teams, and they treat it as a training program. And what we have found is training programs get launched, and oftentimes that's the end of it, not the beginning of it, because it's not treated as a change initiative whereby we define the behavior change that's expected, and we do other things that are common to successful change initiatives. We create a burning platform, as you talked about, Bob. What's the need for change? What's driving this? Why is this essential? Why is it essential now? What's the business case for it? What do we expect to see in terms of results? And who's sponsoring it in the senior leadership team? The fact that senior leaders will approve the budget for a coaching program does not mean that they will actually support the change initiative. And one of the best ways to see that is one that we talked about earlier in the pitfalls is if they don't change any of the scorecards, if scorecards don't include any measures of coaching effectiveness, then the change initiative wasn't that big a priority. And I think the other ones, I really like the research that you guys showed around creating time for coaching. And one thing I'll say is that when managers get good at coaching, it's not so much that the coaching takes that much more time. It's more of a shift, but it takes time to get good at it. And it takes time for learning. And so one of the best things an organization can do is examine how people are spending their time at the beginning and create the space for them, create the time for that. So change how forecasting is done or remove some other requirement that we're placing on them to create the time. And it's not just that they suddenly have more time. It's that the obstacle of not having enough time is no longer one that you have to constantly battle against. If you intentionally look at the expectations you're placing on managers and you can remove one and then slot this in, then from the very beginning of the initiative, you can say, hey, this is so important, we're creating time for you. And the other thing I think that's really important is you've got to create some kind of coaching standards. There has to be clarity around when I am and when I am not coaching. Otherwise, what happens, what we talked about earlier, everything will be called coaching. Oh yeah, I had lunch with my rep, I coached him today. Or yeah, we went on a call together. So yeah, I was definitely coaching. And if we don't have real clarity about what coaching is and is not, then it's not just that coaching program will fail. It's that it'll be so watered down that we'll just change what we call everything. We won't necessarily change the behavior. We'll just change what we call it. And so the last one is maybe the hardest one to talk about, and that is consequences. And by the way, consequences don't always mean negative consequences. It can be positive consequences. But what I've seen organizations, well-intentioned organizations do is not recognize from the beginning that change is hard. And there will be people in the organization that simply don't want to change. They don't want to be held accountable for coaching. They like being able to define whether or not they're coaching with as much ambiguity as possible so that they say they can't. They can say that they can or that they are. And so they're going to be resistant to it. And when we're affecting a change, we have to do two things, and we have to try to keep them sort of even-handed. You can't just do one and not the other. We have to reward the behaviors when we see, or have to call it out, whether that's, taking a section of a company communication, a newsletter or something, and highlighting where people are being effective at coaching, or, testimonials from salespeople about how it's transformed the way they sell and the results they're getting. We have to do that, but we also have to be prepared for what we're going to do when somebody decides they're going to opt out, because they are. And you've got to decide, are we going to treat it like somebody opting out on security policies? Are we going to treat it like somebody opting out on a voluntary social gathering? What are we going to do when somebody decides that they're simply not going to engage in trying to affect the change and how they interact with their people? And I think thinking about it at the beginning and talking about it, if you're the one leading the program, that helps you get a sense of what is leadership's commitment to this. Are they willing to have those conversations, and can we put some teeth to it? And it's not an easy thing to do. And by the way, it doesn't have to be formal all the time. You don't have to write everybody up because they didn't do their coaching assignments, right? You don't have to make them do 100 push-ups or run laps. Sometimes it's just publishing what the results are so that the peer pressure starts to have an effect. But there needs to be something, both lots of positive and a little bit of negative consequences. Does that make sense, Bob?
It does indeed. And we've gotten a couple of, at least one substantive question on this topic as you were explaining this. So let's try to address that one now. While I do, I'm going to just remind everyone, if you have a question or comment, a couple of ways to do that, to share those with us, by the way. You can use the chat in the display window, or you can simply email us at the support@salesmanagement.org. So here's a questioner asks, how do you balance short-term and long-term focus on performance? So you've said that coaching's impact may take some time. What if this is seen as detracting from short-term performance?
Great question. So if it's done properly, it not only should it not detract from short-term performance, it should improve short-term performance. So, but it requires a thoughtful approach to how you deploy it. And the problem with deploying this, like we often do with training programs, is it starts by taking people out of their work for a while, immersing them into this new thing, and then putting them back in their work. And so they lost that time at work. So one way you can avoid the short-term compromise in results is don't do that. Figure out an amount of time that you can make available for people that will not result in short-term loss in performance, right? For them to incrementally begin to implement coaching behaviors into what they already do. So coaching isn't a side different thing. We already talk about sales opportunities in sales organizations, one-on-one and in teams. You just need to slightly adjust how we do that, and you'll get higher returns because we'll close more business and we'll develop skills at the same time. So it's really about adjusting the way we do one-on-ones, adjusting what we do when we're on joint calls, adjusting how we talk about pipeline reports and forecasts, not about not doing them for a while we turn up coaching. So I think that's the first thing. I think the other thing is don't stop measuring the lagging indicators of sales performance. Don't stop measuring what we're actually producing. Don't stop measuring the margin on it. Don't stop measuring the closing ratios, which is more of a leading indicator. Just add to it the behavioral measures. So we're going to add to it measures that we know are in a direct line to the outcomes that we want. So coaching isn't some abstract thing that doesn't affect performance until down the road. If I'm coaching a salesperson on an opportunity, not only would I identify an opportunity for them to improve a skill, they would apply it to that opportunity right away and increase our chances of winning. Is that making sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take a look at something that you were able to put together for us. It's a bit of a representative timeline on what a coaching implementation might look like. Let's see.
Are we going to look at that? Do you think we should?
Yeah, are we? Because I said we were, and yet
there's
it's nowhere to be found.
If only there was a timeline slide. It would make it so much easier to cover.
Wouldn't it? It's a genius idea.
While you're doing that, I'll look at this question. When would an SFE manager be the right way to launch and support a new sales coaching program versus sales manager doing it? Sales effectiveness, or Salesforce size within the industry. So this is a really great question. So we've done this both ways in the past with clients. So sales effectiveness organizations can take on coaching for a period of time to immerse a subset of people into it. I've got a client that's doing this right now. They've got about 1,000 salespeople, and they have designated 10 people as sales coaches. And the job of these people is to help ramp the team up without taking time from the managers, but over time, bringing the managers alongside and demonstrating for them the coaching elements that are being incorporated into their one-on-one conversations, into their joint call reviews, right? And so I would say that the time to do that is a couple things. Number one, when you can support the investment, because you have a new organization that you're turning up. You know, if you think about 10 FTEs who are sales coaches, you have to be able to get the company, and it's a good commitment, but you have to be able to make a commitment that you're going to invest $1 million in that, right? So I think that's the time to do it. I think the other time to do it is when the pace inside the organization is so fast. You see this in a lot of companies with SaaS solutions that are targeting small to medium-sized enterprises, where the transaction speed, the sales cycle is so fast. There's so much activity that even little adjustments to how the sales managers operate can be distracting if they're not yet proficient, if the organization isn't fully prepared. And in those cases, in many instances, it's better to just set up a sales effectiveness team that goes out and does this and works it into the cadence. and over time begin to transition those coaching activities over to the managers. So I think it's more about the transaction speed and volume than it is about the size of the organization, really. One sales effectiveness coach, if you will, can probably support 5 or so sales teams, maybe as many as 10, depending on how it's structured. But it's a good way to do it when the pace is really, really fast.
Yeah, well, also would point out that this addresses what some might consider a fundamental principle of good coaching, is it's kind of separated largely from the discussion of performance management. That is, you're way behind quota. I've been dogging you all quarter on that fact, and now I'm going to help you improve your skills. So having someone else do that helps create a divide between those two separate conversations. It should be separate anyway.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point. That's a good way to get the ball rolling. I mean, ultimately, it's a big expense to keep it for an extended period of time, and they should over time merge together, but it can take some time to make that happen.
Well, I have in the past few moments generated my own slide that shows the potential implementation timeline. I'll let you take us through this, Bob.
Yeah, and so this is a representative timeline, and a couple of things I want to say. So it shows over a 12-month period. That doesn't mean it takes 12 months to launch a coaching program. So I laid this out in terms of months just to give our audience an idea of what are the key milestones that are part of the program. So I'll walk through these really quickly for everybody. The first one is take the time to develop the plan. And when we talk about developing the plan, that means identifying a lot of the things that we've talked about here. What are we measuring? What does coaching look like? What's it look like when it's good? What are we going to do to upskill the managers or to augment them with sales effectiveness coaches so that we can actually begin this? Preparing the organization is really critical. What's driving this change? Because it's hard to say, well, we're going to do coaching and it's really important because we need to improve sales effectiveness. There needs to be some kind of a burning platform around the change and some executive sponsorship. To Bob's point earlier, we also need to be thinking in the plan about how are we coaching the coaches? This is where the sales effectiveness team can be really useful because they can simultaneously coach the coaches and the sellers. And that helps to create more accountability, and it helps to elevate the manager's ability to do it. But you've got to prepare the organization for that. Then generally, and not in all cases, by the way, in some cases, you're going to want to evaluate vendors who have coaching content or coaching tools. One way or another, though, somebody has to create two kinds of models here. The coaching model, whatever that's going to look like for your organization. We've talked before about the guide model that we use, but we also have to make sure that there is content around the selling models. As Bob and I talked about earlier, when we identify a gap in selling behavior, there has to be some assignment for a coach to leverage. So that content has to ultimately be developed. Bob, by the way, we can't see the slide anymore. Are we supposed to be seeing it? There we go. There was a big me. So once we do that and we begin to create and or customize the content, right, then we start to conduct the launch events. The launch events aren't designed to get people proficient with the coaching model. They're designed to introduce what the path to proficiency looks like and to get everybody aligned on the importance, everybody committed to it. We've got to certify whoever the coaches are. They have to be certified on the selling methodology. They have to know that methodology. They have to know the terms and definitions. They have to be able to demonstrate proper execution before they can coach on it. So it's really useful to actually certify that and then certify them, or as a part of that, certify them on the coaching methodology. We've got to begin measuring it once we start actually engaging in coaching activities. So you can see that this is actually a few months in. At the moment we start engaging in coaching activities, that's when we want to start measuring coaching activities. And there are artifacts. We should be tracking every coaching interaction. We should be tracking which interactions end with an actual developmental assignment and which ones don't, because ultimately for elevating the skill and knowledge of the sellers, there's got to be some activity most of the time that's going to help them get better at it. They're not going to simply get better at gathering information about criteria because we told them to do it. Otherwise, all we'd ever have to tell salespeople is what to do, not how to do it. They never have to learn. So we need to have those activities available and start measuring it. And then if there are any coaching tools, I would recommend not deploying the coaching tool at the start of the program. And the reason for this is pretty simple. If we go from not asking managers to track their interactions with their sellers at all, to now asking them to interact in a certain specific way that actually represents good coaching, and then track what those conversations look like in some way and what assignments are giving out. If we do that at the same time we launch the tool, what happens many cases is people blame the tool for the change that's being imposed on them, is their feeling, right? And they hate the tool. If the change happens first, and after they've begun to do it and they realize, well, this is a little bit cumbersome to do this manually, we bring in a tool that makes it less cumbersome. Now the tool is solving a problem. If we ask them to change and the tool is the change, that is the vehicle by which they're changing, the tool for the people you're asking to change looks like the problem. So we'd recommend implementing the program and then showing them the tool and then using the tool. In many cases, that's an easier way to get adoption and you don't get as much resistance to it. And then get into an optimization cadence, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But we should be doing this from very early on, getting into a regular cadence whereby we're optimizing the effectiveness of the program, not just launching it and letting it run.
Now, this notion of managing cadence is one of the elements that you've called out in part 3 of our presentation, which I am now pushing us to advance to because we're running a little bit behind.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. So let's talk about optimizing the program that you have. And this notion of reviewing the cadence, what's going on with the sequence of and frequency of activities.
And you know, it's interesting because a lot of times we implement programs, but there's no formal structured way that we go back and check and evaluate how effective the coaching initiative is. So when we talk about the cadence, what we'd suggest is at least quarterly, we are reviewing the coaching initiative relative to the objectives that we had at the beginning. And by the way, if you're implementing a coaching program without clearly defined objectives, that's a challenge also, right? So what is it that we're doing? I would suggest that there be an optimization team that includes a senior leader who was one of the sponsors of the initiative in the first place, at least one, if not several, sales manager, sales enablement representative who was responsible for really managing this as a project and defining what the program would look like and then implementing it, and then a sales leader. And think about whether or not you want to have a representative from the actual sales team, the primary target of the coaching. And then what we want to do is each time we get together, we want to review our performance against key metrics. And those metrics should include not only the lagging indicators of sales performance, but also the leading indicators of coaching activities, learning and development assignments given, assignments completed, skill, competency, scoring, to see, are we in fact affecting the improvement that we intended to affect with that team? And it's the optimization team's job, and they don't have to, everybody's have to say on that. You can have people rotate through that, but their job is to look at the metrics and the performance and evaluate where we are and do a gap analysis. What's working, what isn't, compare people who are really performing well in this environment as coaches and as sellers and those who aren't, and figure out what the differences are. And then do some root cause analysis before defining an improvement plan. What happens when we don't do this isn't that you don't get feedback. It's that the feedback ends up being a lot of solutions looking for a problem, because there's a never-ending stream. If you're managing a program or an initiative like this, there's a never-ending stream of ideas for how you can make it better. Unfortunately, in many cases, there are ideas that are looking for a problem. They're not a problem. And so even when you do get ideas, if you're a member of the optimization team, those ideas flow to you. You always want to be asking people, okay, just so we understand, what is the problem that we're solving for if we make this change to how we coach? Because this is how the programs, I mentioned this a couple of times, this is how they end up getting watered down to not actually being the program that was initially conceived is because we get ideas. A lot of the ideas are being generated to try to make the program match more closely what we already do. And that's not the purpose of the program at all. The purpose is to change what we do. So when you have a team and you have some structure to the optimization cadence, then you can avoid simply reacting to all of the feedback you get and trying to make everybody happy that you're making changes to it. You can be more intentional about approaching things from a strategic perspective and doing things that really make it more effective, not make it more like what we already do.
Bob, a question that might be worth interjecting at this point, though we are a bit short of time. We had a questioner ask about on the topic of measuring the impact of coaching. How important is it to ask coachees? Should we measure coachee satisfaction? Is that what you call them, by the way? Coach E? Probably not. Yeah,
Mentee, Coach E.
Right. Neither sounds
Player.
quite right. But
Player.
Yeah, the consumers of coaching.
Yeah.
Do their sentiments and input matter when it comes to judging how well we're doing?
It can. I think that the way to do that is not just to ask them if they're satisfied, but ask them what is most helpful and what kinds of things are least helpful. So, and it falls into basically two broad categories. There are people for whom great coaching is what happens when you tell me I'm doing a great job when I'm performing and you leave me alone when I'm not. If there has to be a way when we're asking for feedback that we are able to identify if that's what we're getting, right? Legitimate feedback is, this was really helpful because it helped me get better at blank. This was helpful because I didn't realize I was doing this instead of that, right? If the coaching doesn't affect any improvement or skill or knowledge, and the salespeople all love it, then it probably isn't doing what you want it to do. I think it's okay to ask. The other thing is, it's good to ask whether or not the coaching is helping them get better. It's helping them to develop skills they didn't have. But you have to form those questions. It's not just, do you like it? Do you feel like the coaching is effective? Because generically, a lot of salespeople would rather not. And that's partly because they've never had good coaching. I've had a number of instances where we've seen coaches who were really going through some pretty clear identification of gaps and giving people work to do, assignments to go do. And people walked out of the one-on-one saying, it's the best one-on-one I ever had. And they had work to do. So most of the time, salespeople are going to want that.
Yeah, this is interesting. We found that a lack of development is often cited as a reason that high performers leave organizations. So, let's not underestimate the interest in coaching, no matter how awkward or difficult it may be.
Yeah, it's not always because they're high or low performers, right? It's some people want to be left alone because they just want to be left alone. And by the way, if you're really building a performance culture where continuous improvement is valued, that's problematic anyway.
Yeah, good.
Do we have
other things to call out on this list, Bob? We have just a couple more minutes, and we'll try to get to a couple more questions as well.
Cool. I do see a question from Linda on here, Bob.
Yeah, you want to jump to that? Let's see.
Yeah, what are some of the leading indicators, leading metrics for coaching and determining if coaching is happening? So I love this question. And I've actually had conversations recently with people say, yeah, coaching is really important, but there's no way to measure whether it's effective. There is a way to measure whether it's happening and whether it's effective. So first off, one of the first standards that you want to decide on if you're going to implement coaching and you're going to be serious about this becoming a cultural norm is that you track all coaching conversations and any interaction whereby a manager is giving a seller any feedback is a coaching conversation. Whether it's good coaching or not depends on the artifacts from it. And feedback isn't bad. So let me just make this clear. If I'm working with a seller and they do something and I think they should do X and they did Y, and we agree that X is the best practice in our organization, and I tell them, oh, you did Y, but you should have done X and here's Y. And they say, yeah, okay, I'll do that next time. First thing, if I'm a good coach, I want to check to see if they actually can do it. Because in a lot of cases, the reason people don't do something isn't that they didn't know they should, it's that they're not proficient yet. So I'd say, okay, let's role play that and see how you would do it. If they execute the skill, then in fact, that feedback was all they needed, right? But that's not what's normally going to happen. What's going to happen is they won't be able to execute the skill. The artifact of an effective coaching conversation in that case is a developmental assignment, some learning activity. And if you are providing people with resources like online learning and they're going to assign those activities through that system, then you always have good artifacts to track. So the coaching happening is documenting that there was a conversation and keeping the notes, right? So they've got evidence that it happened. Effective coaching that actually moves the needle on skill and knowledge includes an assignment and coaching that actually impacts skill and performance. You'll actually see competency scores. So what we really like to do is see managers actually, like when I just gave that example of role playing, actually score how well they did. Hey, that was okay, but it's really only at a 2 on the competency model. We want to get you to a 4. So here's an assignment that's going to help you. So now I've got a record that there was a coaching conversation. I've got a score, competency score against our model for a particular behavior. And I've got a trackable assignment. And presumably the rep either does or doesn't the assignment. So now I can tell whether or not, as coaches, we're holding people accountable. And those are the kinds of leading indicators that we would suggest that you measure. And by the way, we do have a whole white paper that we've created on leading metrics. And if anybody's interested in that, you can reach out to me afterward and we'll make that available to you as well.
Great, Bob. Let's call out one more thing on this list, which is the last thing, the improvement action plan. Now, are you talking about a PIP here?
No, this is not. Well, I guess an organizational PIP.
You know, we love PIPs. We're in sales management.
So when we talk about this is for the program, not for the seller, right? So we've decided that we are going to become a coaching organization, a coaching and learning sales organization, right? So we've decided we're going to implement this program and we're going to adopt these behaviors. When we talk about an improvement action plan, it is what modifications or adjustments do we need to make to how we're doing this? Do we need to make a change to how we measure behaviors and report? Do we need to make a change to the scorecard for senior leaders? Do we have some obstacle that surfaced? Are we doing something as a leadership team that's actually counterproductive and we need to go clarify that? Is there some ambiguity about what good coaching looks like? Is there some gap in terms of tools or resources that the managers need? So this optimization team is responsible for identifying the gaps or the obstacles that are keeping us from being as effective as possible. Another way to think of it is the next best opportunity to improve. Do we need to do more to identify the people who are really adopting it and celebrate those successes? That's what this team is doing to help build and increase momentum for the program. And by the way, one thing I didn't mention earlier, but culturally, organizations that struggle with this, especially with some of the terminology like gaps, right, are organizations that don't like to make mistakes and don't want people to fail. It has to be okay that I'm not 100% proficient in all of the skills or coaching is going to fail. Because nobody's going to want to see or hear that they have an opportunity for improvement. And I'll tell you, I've never met a sales organization or sales team, ours included, me included, where I can't get better at the things that we're teaching people to do. So there's always opportunities for improvement, and that really needs to be okay. And this is more the programmatic view of that. And it helps to model for the rest of the organization. Hey, we too are always looking for ways to get better.
Let's try to bounce one very quick question in here. Here it is. So who should decide what a person is coached on?
That is a really good question. Anybody, either person, either the coach or the player, right?
Yeah.
So so first off, the root cause analysis, and and I'm not going to pick on specific coaching models, but if you took a golf lesson and you're constantly slicing the golf ball and you go to the instructor, you tell them how you'd like to have this certain handicap, and the instructor says, okay, let me see you hit the ball, and you do what you do and you slice it, and the instructor says, yeah, you're going to have to quit slicing it. I suggest you focus on not slicing anymore. You're going to be real unhappy with the lesson. So when it's what the salesperson should be coached on, actually, if I'm doing the coaching, if we identify 4 or 5 opportunities, I'm fine with the salesperson picking the one they want to work on because they're going to be motivated around that one. I'm not okay with them randomly saying, yeah, I don't feel like working on anything this week. That's not okay. Right? Or I feel pretty good about where I am. I feel like I'm doing what I need to do, right? As long as the salesperson is picking a legitimate opportunity, they're motivated for that one, and I would be fine with that. However, diagnosing the root cause of the gap, the opportunity for improvement, figuring out why they're not already at a 5 on the 1 to 5 proficiency scale for that skill, that's definitely falls into coach's responsibility. And my suggestion is, please, coaches, do not ask sellers, what do you think you need to do better at? It's okay to say, hey, these are the 3 areas where you've got opportunities to improve. Which one do you think you want to focus on this week? That's okay. But just randomly saying, hey, you're not qualifying as well as you need to. What do you think you should do differently? If they knew that, they would do it differently. So it's okay to ask them out of a set which one they'd like to focus on. It's not okay to make it their responsibility to figure out what their assignment should be, what the root cause is. That's the expert advice that coaches are supposed to be able to provide.
That's great, Bob. Now, if I had some piano music, that's what you would be hearing right now, because we are just about out of time. But before we say goodbye, I want to point out a couple of quick things. Namely, we have a series of sessions on this topic. You heard Bob refer to some things such as having a sales model. That's one of the fundamental things covered in the first session we did on foundations of coaching success. And you'll find that in our archive. And you can also look forward to 3 additional sessions coming up on the dates shown here. So I just have you pay attention to that. You can visit us on the events page on our site at salesmanagement.org, and you can register for these upcoming sessions. We hope that you will. So, Bob, we have reached the appointed hour, and I'd just like to thank you. This is a really good session. I think this is going to be a valuable resource in our archive for companies that
My pleasure.
Really want to take a close look at this.
Yep, enjoyed it. Always fun to talk about this. I could talk about this all day.
Well, that's a very kind offer. However,
But
yeah, we will be moving on. And before we do, I will actually remind our audience about the next session in this series. You can enjoy that one on October 19th. That session will be called Assessing Sales Coaching Program Effectiveness. Again, learn more about this and many other sessions on our website events page at salesmanagement.org. And that's a wrap. I'm Bob Kelly, Sales Management Association Chairman. On behalf of Bob Sanders, our presenter today, I'd like to thank everyone for their attention. Goodbye until next time.